Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. A row erupts in the United States as President Biden appears to suggest Donald Trump supporters are, quote, garbage. This as tensions remain high, with both sides attempting to control the narrative in the campaign's final days. Donald Trump criticizes Biden's comments, accusing Democrats of running a campaign of hate, as both he and Kamala Harris travel to the swing states of North Carolina and Wisconsin. And Hezbollah's new leader, Naim Qassem, says the group would agree to a ceasefire with Israel under, quote, acceptable terms. This as two top US diplomats travel to Israel for talks. Hello and welcome. The US presidential candidate Kamala Harris has promised to unite the country in a major primetime closing argument speech in Washington. Well, this comes as President Joe Biden has created a firestorm after appearing to call Donald Trump supporters, quote, garbage. Well, that criticism was in response to a comedian who appeared at a Trump rally on Sunday, and he called the US territory of Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage. Nick Harper has this report from Washington.
In front of her largest campaign crowd to date, Kamala Harris set out the choice now facing millions of Americans, warning of the dangers she sees in a second Donald Trump presidency.
And I pledge to be a president for all Americans.
She tried to strike a note of unity using the same site in downtown DC where Trump rallied his supporters on January the 6th, 2021. Just before they stormed the US Capitol. But overshadowing that message were comments made Tuesday night by President Joe Biden, in which he appeared to disparage Trump's voters.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable.
The White House now in damage limitation mode, clarifying that the president was referring specifically to the comedian who made racist comments about Puerto Rico at Trump's rally in New York on Sunday. But comparisons are being made to Hillary Clinton's 2016 comments about Trump voters that undermined the final days of her presidential campaign.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
In Pennsylvania, Donald Trump tried to distance himself from the remarks about Puerto Rico, instead rallying with the local community.
Hispanics, Latinos, nobody loves our Latino community and our Puerto Rican community more than I do. Nobody.
Winning over Pennsylvania's sizable Puerto Rican voter base is now becoming pivotal to winning the state and the keys to the White House. Both candidates are campaigning in North Carolina and Wisconsin this Wednesday, with Harris also fitting in a stop in Pennsylvania. But how she responds to Biden's comments is likely to dominate the news agenda just 6 days out from the election. Nick Harper, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Well, let's speak now to our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, who joins us from DC. Simon, great to have you with us. A lot of people at the Trump rally in North Carolina today are going to be pretty upset by the language used by President Biden. And I'm just wondering, is the Republican Party managing to use those comments in which President Biden appeared to call Trump supporters garbage to their advantage?
Well, Joe Biden, of course, says that he wasn't calling supporters, plural, garbage, but that actually there was an apostrophe there. He was referring, he says, to one of Trump's supporters, the comedian at that rally who made the racist joke about Puerto Rico. But Kamala Harris has certainly reacted to this as though it's a problem for her campaign, and Donald Trump has reacted to this as though this is a massive opportunity for him. So he's taken to social media to say that these comments prove that neither Joe Biden nor Vice President Kamala Harris are fit to occupy the nation's highest office. He knows how potent and how disastrous for Hillary Clinton her claim that his supporters were a basket of deplorables proved to be back in 2016. And Donald Trump will very much be hoping not only that he's able to capitalize out of this and re-inspire people to vote for him, but also that this is an opportunity to turn the conversation away from the focus that has been placed on not just the racist joke that was told at Madison Square Garden about Puerto Rico, but about a whole raft of other misogynistic and hate-filled comments that were made during a variety of the warm-up acts leading to Donald Trump's appearance at that rally. Now, Donald Trump told Fox News last night he'd never heard of the comedian, he doesn't know him, he's never met him, he wasn't even aware that he was booked to be part of the bill, but that joke has damaged him greatly among the Latino community, certainly among Puerto Ricans, so he's got repair work to do there. And for Donald Trump, this is a gift. It's manna from heaven from Joe Biden, a massive opportunity to change the conversation, point the finger back at the Democrats and say, look at these people, they're so dismissive of half the country, millions of people who have already voted for Donald Trump, not to mention the others that will be coming. And if it's manna from heaven for Donald Trump, it's a real problem for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, it is. And she's in North Carolina today trying to distance herself from what President Biden said. I'm just wondering, what is she saying, and is what she's saying having the desired effect? Simon?
Well, she's on the one hand saying that President Biden has explained the comment, but on the other hand making it pretty clear she doesn't buy the explanation and is saying that she doesn't believe that one should ever dismiss American voters for deciding who they want to support in an American election campaign. Because this really, I mean, this comment, news of it spread even as Kamala Harris was on her feet here in Washington, D.C. last night, speaking at the Ellipse, inspiring people, she hoped, by saying that she was going to be a president for all Americans. She was going to be a unifier, not a divider like Donald Trump. And of course, she was speaking, Tom, in the exact spot where Donald Trump back on January the 6th, 2021, made his speech to his supporters, urging them to head up to Congress where they would, within hours, start rampaging and breaking into the congressional building. So for Kamala Harris to step off that stage last night and then be told by her aides that Joe Biden, who, by the way, Harris staff have tried largely to keep off the campaign trail and out of the news, had made this comment in a discussion he was having with Get Out the Vote activists trying to mobilize the Latino vote, became an immediate problem for her campaign. And she's definitely moving to distance herself, unusually, from something that her boss, the president, has said.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking a bit more about Joe Biden with one of our guests in just a moment. I just want to ask you about the early voting phenomenon. More than 3 million people have voted early in Georgia, and officials there saying that's a record. And I'm just wondering what we should read into that and what it might tell us about which way Georgia could swing this time.
Well, the numbers are astonishing, and the numbers nationally are astonishing. 54,386,000 Americans have already cast their votes. So for them, nothing that happens over the course of the next 5 days has any relevance whatsoever. It's too late. They've made their decisions. As far as those numbers in Georgia are concerned, and as far as the national numbers are concerned, and nationally, 41% of votes have been cast by registered Democrats, 40% by registered Republicans, 19% by others. That's voters who are not registered with one of the two major parties. I mean, one has to be very, very careful with this data, because all it tells you is that registered Democrats and registered Republicans are voting in record numbers, but it doesn't tell you how they're voting. So you can't look at those numbers in Georgia and say, well, the number of Republicans showing up at the polls must be really great news for Donald Trump, because you don't know how many of them don't want to vote for Trump and are actually voting for Harris, or perhaps voting for a third-party candidate like Jill Stein of the Green Party. Same situation in Michigan, where she's been openly going after Kamala Harris's vote in a bid to deny her victory in the state. So all we can say, looking at these numbers, is Americans enthusiastically want to vote, and they want to vote before Election Day. Maybe that's because they're absolutely sick to the back teeth with this election campaign and they just want to get it past them. Or maybe because it is they are so enthused about Kamala Harris and Donald Trump that they actually want to get out and show their support early. The numbers are astonishing, but what they say, much, much harder to divine.
Okay. All right, Simon Moggs in Washington, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest on that. Well, let's get some more analysis now with the attorney and Trump 2024 campaign surrogate, Erin Elmore. Thank you so much for being with us, Erin. I just want to pick up on one of the things we've been talking about earlier in the bulletin, the word garbage. It's a word that seems now to be haunting both campaign teams. For which party would you say this garbage fury is more damaging?
Well, I think certainly the Democrats, because one came from a rogue comedian at a group event and the other came from the sitting president of the United States. And now I know what you're going to talk about next is, well, he said he didn't say that. Well, let's say if we're going to just take that line of thought, then let's use that for Donald Trump. Let's apply that standard equally, because the left continues to push the narrative of the very fine people hoax, or that Trump supports 2025. And what I would say in return is he didn't say that. He doesn't do that. So that just argument of saying he didn't say that for Joe Biden isn't really going to work, because we know that's not the standard of the mainstream media or the left in general.
Indeed. And Kamala Harris, of course, is trying to put some distance between herself and what Joe Biden said. Do you think she's succeeding in any respect?
I mean, it's hard because when I go on social media, I see an echo chamber of conservatives and those who lean right and the Latinos for Trump saying, are we really garbage? And I think of Corey Compouture, who lost his life at the Butler, Pennsylvania rally for President Trump. Is he garbage, Joe Biden? Is he garbage, Kamala Harris? Are the truck drivers, firefighters, soldiers in this country that happen to support Donald Trump garbage? I think the fact that it came from the president of the United States speaks volumes. And I think the Democrats are going to have a very hard time cleaning up this garbage.
Well, I mean, it's the last thing either party probably wanted at this late stage, because, of course, we're talking about an election in which the polls are really, it's looking neck and neck. A real nail biter. And I just want to ask you, how do you see the polls evolving during the course of these remaining 5 or 6 days?
It's certainly looking better for Donald Trump. If you look at the betting markets, the poly market, Donald Trump is up sometimes by like 70%. And I know we touched on the early voting earlier. I think it's a big step to say all these Republicans aren't voting for Donald Trump. If you were a betting person, you would say the fact that the Republicans are turning out at a much higher rate than Democrats in many of these swing states would be good for Donald Trump. So I think that the momentum right now is behind President Trump and his campaign. And I think it's a vote for sanity. I think I've also seen that this transgender issue and Title IX issue be a big sleeper issue for suburban women, that Donald Trump doesn't generally have gravitate towards him. A lot of these moms that were athletes themselves, their daughters are athletes. They're having to share bathrooms and locker rooms with biological men. These girls are losing scholarships to college or a chance on a podium for a medal because of biological men. And these women, with whom I've spoken to a lot of them across the country, they're all saying, I'm not necessarily the biggest supporter of Donald Trump, but I am a supporter of my daughter, and therefore I'm going to vote for Donald Trump.
One person that isn't going to vote for Donald Trump is the former Republican Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's just said he's still a Republican, but he's going to support Harris. He calls Trump un-American. He's not the only one, is he?
I mean, he's basically another typical Hollywood liberal elite at this point. So it doesn't really carry, as Republicans, we are, generally speaking now, the hardworking Americans that pay our taxes and fight the wars. We're not very concerned about what people in Hollywood are saying, or those that make millions of dollars just to act. And yes, I understand that he was a politician, but it was a different era. And this is not surprising at all. I think he should probably worry about more, what's going on in his state, because California under Newsom and Harris and all of these liberals in that state have really decimated the economy there. And maybe he should get back into some sort of political office out there and try to help his state as opposed to worrying what Donald Trump is doing.
But it's not just Hollywood actors that are coming out saying these things about Donald Trump. We've got 200 former employees in the Bush administration. You've got the Cheneys. We've got former White House press secretary under Donald Trump.
The Cheneys!
But 200 former employees in the Republican administration coming out writing that letter.
Let me just explain that to you. It's very easy to understand that Donald Trump, yes, he is a Republican, but we have created a new Republican Party, and that's the America First Party. Right. And so if you want to talk about the Bushes or the Cheneys.
Okay, what about John Negroponte?
That Republican Party is dead. That Republican Party is gone. They are neocons that love endless wars. Of course they want Kamala. We have new wars under Kamala. Under Donald Trump, it was the first president in my lifetime that didn't have any new wars. So of course people like Dick Cheney, who is one of the biggest neocons of our generation, would love Kamala. She keeps the military industrial complex booming.
Last question. I mean, clearly emotions running really high with this election. We were just talking to our correspondent in DC, and he was saying some people are looking forward to the end of the election campaign. They're tired of it. Others are clearly very excited about it. Does it feel like people are really mobilized and that people will be heading to the voting booths on the 5th in very large numbers, Erin?
Well, I'm on the campaign trail with Women for Trump right now. I don't know if you've seen it online, but with Laura Trump and people like Sage Steele, who was at ESPN, and car driving racer, I think she was NASCAR, Danica Patrick and Savannah Chrisley. And we have all been on the Women for Trump tour, just canvassing this country in our pink jackets. And the momentum is really out there. Most people have early voted. People are really excited to get out there and cast their vote for Donald J. Trump. And I just feel this groundswell of, as you said, emotion, of excitement. On our side, we definitely want change. We want sanity. We want logic. We want rationality. And I think Donald Trump is the only way to get that.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Erin Elmore, thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's get some more reaction now, and I can speak to Jarrod Bernstein, a former Obama administration official and Democrat strategist. Thank you so much indeed for taking the time to talk to us as well. This garbage furor has sort of boomeranged round, hasn't it, from the Republicans to hit the Democrats. That's thanks to some comments, as we've been saying, by President Joe Biden. Would you say that President Biden's comments were ill-advised?
I would say that Joe Biden is a good man and been a great president. And anybody who knows Joe Biden knows that every once in a while he says something that doesn't quite match up and is not the most politic thing. Vice President addressed this head on today. She said she strongly disagreed with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. And I was just listening to your previous guest talk about being on the campaign trail with Women for Trump. I mean, I can't imagine what that actually looks like, campaigning for a guy who actually was found having committed sexual assault and, and being convicted of multiple felonies. How do you campaign in a group called Women for Trump and have a straight face after what this man's been convicted of? And as you accurately pointed out, he's got 200 plus former officials. His own vice president are not voting for this guy. And I think the American public is really finally tuned in at the end of this marathon and really understanding what's at stake here. And that's the future of democracy of this country.
Just going back to President Biden, I mean, it ought to be a real asset for a candidate to have a sitting president from the same party for whom she served as vice president backing her and on the campaign trail. That ought to be the case. But it does look, doesn't it, increasingly like President Biden's more of a liability than an asset for Kamala Harris, doesn't it?
I wouldn't say that. I would say there are certain constituencies, particularly in Pennsylvania, near where Joe Biden grew up in Scranton, PA, where he is an asset on the campaign trail and people really resonate with him. He's also been a lifelong champion for the middle class and for the working class, and that's really resonating. And I think they're deploying President Biden where he makes the most difference. Does he say something every once in a while that you wish he may have said a little bit differently? Of course. But that's part of the charm and love that Joe Biden brings to the campaign trail. He's going to make a gaffe here and then, and that's what happened.
Let's talk about the polls. 2.5 months ago, Kamala Harris had quite a clear lead in the polls. That seems to have evaporated. In fact, the polls seem to have crossed over to the other side. Well, some of them have done, giving Donald Trump a very slight lead nationally. What do you think the reason is for the decline in popularity for her?
I don't think it's a decline in popularity. I think we always knew that this was going to be a really close election. And I think what we're going to see down the stretch in the last 4 or 5 days of this campaign is that the ground game that Biden and Harris have built are actually going to come into play. And we're going to see voter turnout in key areas where Kamala Harris needs it actually happen. I think the polls were always going to be tight. We always knew this was going to be a close election. And we're going to see the turnout machine really do what it has to do on election day. And really is already doing with the early voting turnout.
Obviously, with tight polls, everybody's nerves are pretty frayed at the moment. And I just want to ask you, what sort of a difference you think last night's address by Kamala Harris might have made to her chances? Do you think that could have given her a little bit of a lift?
Listen, I think that she is going to have gone into Election Day, as we say in American football, she will have left it all out on the field. There will be no chance, no opportunity that she hasn't tried to take advantage of to make sure the American public knows what she stands for, knows what Donald Trump stands for. And, you know, the old adage goes, if somebody tells you who they are, believe them. Donald Trump has showed us that he has fascist tendencies, that he wants to abolish parts of the Constitution, that he has Project 2025. He wants to radically remake the society that we live in, the democracy that we live in. And I think that message is going to resonate with the American public, and Kamala Harris is going to be the victor on Election Day.
Okay. Jarrod Bernstein, really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's go check now of some of the day's other news stories. At least 72 people have been killed in catastrophic flooding in Spain. Rescuers are desperately trying to find survivors and bodies in the mud. This after torrential downpours turned roads into rapids, trapping people inside their homes and cars. Well, the flooding began at lunchtime on Tuesday, wreaking havoc from the provinces of Malaga in the south to Valencia in the east. Well, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has deployed soldiers to the devastated regions, and he's warning residents there could be more bad weather to come.
We are working in a coordinated way to do what is possible, and we are going to use all means necessary today and tomorrow, and for as long as it takes, so that we can recover from this tragedy. We are not going to abandon you. I would like to ask citizens to not let our guard down as the storm continues to cause damage. We cannot yet consider this devastating episode to be over.
The Canadian government has accused India's Interior Minister of ordering a campaign of violence, intimidation and intelligence gathering targeting Sikh separatists in Canada. Well, India is yet to formally respond to the allegation against Amit Shah, who is Prime Minister Modi's closest aide. Well, previously, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that Canada had credible evidence that agents for the Indian government were involved in the murder of the Canadian Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in British Columbia back in June of 2023. South Korea says it is considering sending a team of military monitors to Ukraine. This after reports that North Korea was deploying troops to Russia. Well, some reports say that at least 11,000 North Korean troops are in Russia, which is currently engaged in a nearly 3-year-long war with Ukraine. North Korea, meanwhile, may launch an intercontinental ballistic missile around the time of the US election. That's according to South Korea, who say that a mobile launcher has been deployed for a possible test. The Hermit Kingdom's leader has flaunted his nuclear program in recent months, conducting various tests and even revealing a facility for producing weapons-grade uranium. A Chinese spaceship carrying a 3-person crew has docked with its orbiting space station. This as the country seeks to expand its exploration of outer space in competition with the United States. Well, the team of 2 men and 1 woman will replace the astronauts who have lived on the Tiangong space station for the last 6 months. Well, the young crew is going to conduct various experiments and maintain the orbiting station as China works towards placing astronauts on the moon by the year 2030. To Lebanon now, and Israel has struck neighborhoods surrounding the historic city of Baalbek just a few hours after it ordered evacuations, prompting thousands of people to flee. Well, Lebanese officials have expressed their concerns that further strikes on Baalbek could potentially damage the 3,000-year-old city, which is in fact a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Well, the Israeli army spokesperson Avishai Adriai issued this warning to the residents of Baalbek.
This is an urgent warning to the residents of Baalbek. The Israeli army will act forcefully against Hezbollah positions and facilities within your city and villages. We do not intend to harm you. For your safety, you must evacuate your homes immediately and leave the city via the following routes: Zahle, Baalbek Highway, Nakhla Baalbek Road and the Ars Road.
Well, this comes as the United States announced that 2 senior advisors to President Biden will arrive in Israel on Thursday to try and negotiate a deal aimed at ending the war in Lebanon and facilitating the return of displaced civilians from both sides of the border. Well, in the last couple of hours, Hezbollah's new leader, Naim Qassem, who indicated that the group would consider a ceasefire with Israel if terms were acceptable, but he emphasized that a viable proposal has not yet been presented. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Hanin Ghaddar, who is a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you so much for being with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. So we've heard from Naim Qassem. Those were, I think, his first comments since he was named on Tuesday as Hassan Nasrallah's replacement. He said that Hezbollah would agree to a ceasefire with Israel under acceptable conditions. Any clues as to what those terms and conditions might be?
Clearly, this is his first speech, and he's still trying to gather his thoughts. He was reading from a paper frequently. It wasn't really. He looked as if he was like really in denial. He doesn't understand diplomacy in that sense. The ceasefire cannot happen before the negotiations. The negotiations are actually about the ceasefire. So he's requesting, first and foremost, that no negotiations will take place without a ceasefire. He's requesting Israel to stop bombing Lebanon before Hezbollah agrees to start even the negotiations, which is not possible. He's obviously not willing to accept the terms that Hochstein, the White House envoy to Lebanon, Amos Hochstein, brought to the Lebanese government and to Hezbollah by default, which means that Hezbollah will have to withdraw to the north of Litani before any negotiations. And the Israelis are very willing to continue with their war in Lebanon until Hezbollah accepts. The problem is that Naim Qassem projected a kind of victory that is not happening on the ground. And the Israelis are not going to stop. So what he's trying to propose is that we said that Hezbollah can go on for months before, any negotiations start. So he is saying basically that despite all the defeat, even if we have one person fighting on the ground, we will go on. This is suicidal. This is suicidal for the people who are fleeing their villages and towns and cities. And this is suicidal even for Hezbollah. I'm not sure if this is actually what he really meant, or this is the beginning of a longer process of negotiations where he has to start with raising the ceiling to a certain extent and then accepting the possible more realistic scenario. And I think this is the case. He's trying to raise the ceiling as the new leader of Hezbollah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, of course, he's been in the job for one day. In terms of rhetoric and messages, do you note any distinct difference between the sort of language, the sort of messaging that Qassem used compared to that of his predecessor, Hassan Nasrallah, or do you think he's just going to carry on with the work of his predecessor?
It's not his decision at this point because the leadership of Hezbollah, as we knew it, has changed completely. Naim Qassem is no Hassan Nasrallah. And in fact, the actual replacement of Hassan Nasrallah was Hashim Safiuddin. Naim Qassem was the continuous, lifelong deputy. This is how he is known. He was never groomed or trained to be the leader of Hezbollah. The person who was actually groomed to be the leader after Nasrallah, if anything happened to him, was Hashim Safiuddin. And they killed him. He has no leadership leadership material. I don't think that he wanted to be in this position. I don't think the Iranians wanted him to be in this position. I don't think they wanted to appoint anyone at this point because they know that they are going to be in danger. But I think the appointment of Naim Qassem at this point, despite the fact that he has zero leadership material, is only to reassure the community, which is without a leader, without a father figure at the head of Hezbollah, is feeling confused, scared, leaderless. And this whole talk about the end of political Shiism in Lebanon, that there's no Hezbollah left in Lebanon, and actually our Iranians are hands-on leading Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is not something that the Lebanese Shia even would accept, force the Iranians and what is left of Hezbollah's leadership to get someone to this position. I don't think this is it was a very wise decision. It was just, like reassuring just Shia. But his speech today, the fact that he was speaking like a political analyst, not a leader, he was reading from a paper. His tone, he had zero charisma, no passion whatsoever. The people, and he addressed the Shia community in Lebanon, right? He said basically that we will not accept the negotiations for a ceasefire until a ceasefire happens, which is very contradictory. But also when he talks to the Shia community in Lebanon, he did not give any reassurances, no promises of reconstruction, no promises of compensations. On the contrary, he told them that this is going to take a very long time and you have to be patient, which if I were a refugee today in the streets of Beirut and Lebanon, I would totally freak out. His speech was the opposite of Nasrallah's speech, which was about concrete victories, concrete achievements, reassurances. Hassan Nasrallah represented a decade, represented an era of Hezbollah where Hezbollah he marked the victories of Hezbollah. He marked Hezbollah's legacy and victory. Naim Qassem seems to be starting a new era of Hezbollah where there are no victories, there are a lot of challenges, and I don't think this speech was successful at all. I think it was the Shia today in Lebanon are less assured than before, and he did not really even present a roadmap for ceasefire. He just said that we can go on. And what does that mean? Who knows?
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Hanin Ghaddar at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Bye.
Got some business news stories for you now. And the US economy grew at an annual rate of 2.8% in the 3 months leading up to September. That is a slight decrease from the previous quarter's 3%. Well, that data from the Commerce Department shows that the US is set for one of the strongest economic performances amongst major economies this year, driven by a rebound in consumer spending. Well, this 6 days ahead of the presidential election, in which the economy is top of voters' concerns. Volkswagen has reported a 42% drop in third quarter profit. That's its lowest level in 3 years, and that news sent shares plunging to a 24-year low. Europe's biggest automaker faces rising costs, restructuring expenses, and slow demand, particularly from China. While results were released on the same day as the second round of talks between the company and unions over wages. The Swiss banking giant UBS registered a net profit of $1.4 billion in Q3. The bank, which suffered a $715 million loss in the same period last year, posted a 5% increase in revenue. Well, last year, UBS was forced to buy its former rival Credit Suisse under pressure from the Swiss authorities in order to avoid its bankruptcy. Gold is rising due to the uncertainty related to the outcome of the US election and with markets pricing in another Fed rate cut next week. Well, gold is up 35% this year and is on track for its best annual growth since 1979. Well, the World Gold Council says that global demand is steady year on year in Q3 as higher investment activity has offset reduced consumption of jewelry. Saudi Arabia's new airline Riyadh Air has ordered 60 narrow-body aircraft from Airbus. This as it prepares for launch next year. Well, the deal announced earlier today is Riyadh Air's second major purchase after it agreed last year to buy 39 wide-body Boeing Dreamliners with options for 33 more jets. We've got some sports news for you now. The England prop Joe Marler has suggested that the All Blacks' iconic pre-match haka should be dropped ahead of this weekend's Autumn Nations opener. In 2019, England faced a fine for breaching protocol before the World Cup semi-final when Marler crossed the line during a reverse V formation to encroach on the New Zealand players. Well, Marler is not in the lineup for Saturday's fixture at Twickenham. Anthony Volpe is the World Series star after delivering the biggest hit of his life and the Yankees season. Well, his grand slam in the bottom of the third leg to the Yankees to an 11-4 Game 4 victory over the Dodgers, extending the World Series.
Perfect price, perfect time, just what they needed.
Alexei Popyrin pulled off an upset against fourth-seeded Daniel Medvedev, winning 6-4, 2-6, 7-6 in a tense second-round match at the Paris Masters today. The 25-year-old Australian, who claimed his first Masters 1000 title in Montreal this summer, has previously lost to Medvedev in their last 3 encounters. Well, the match featured a combined total of 86 unforced errors from both players under the roof of the Palais Omnisport. Let's get a reminder before we leave you of our top stories. President Biden appears to suggest that Donald Trump supporters are, quote, garbage. This as tensions remain high, with both sides attempting to control the narrative in the campaign's final days. Donald Trump accuses Democrats of running a campaign of hate as both he and Kamala Harris travel to the swing states of North Carolina and Wisconsin. And Hezbollah's new leader, Naim Qassem, says the group would agree to a ceasefire with Israel under, quote, acceptable terms. This as 2 top US diplomats travel to Israel for talks. Well, that is all we have time for. Coming up next is Riz Khan, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join us for Global News Today. That is a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.